that God is still creating. And not only creating, but speaking to us through that creation? Do we believe that God's Spirit is alive and well in our world? As I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate that an eye full of wonder is all that can be perceived at any one time. Wonder surrounds us in every given moment, yet we need to be attuned to it. On the other hand, too much wonder can be overpowering. I remember visiting many of America's national parks and needing to catch my breath at the awesomeness of it all. The ocean is the one place where I grasp most clearly the magnitude of God. It's so vast and so powerful, so much like God to me. Those are breathtaking moments. But most of the time we simply need to stop and smell the roses, as the saying goes, or stop and capture the beauty of something, anything that catches our eye. Yet how many of us do that? Our perception is determined by many things, perhaps as much by upbringing as anything. Children are filled with wonderment. They have little difficulty with mystery, possibly because for them all of life is imbued with it. But what about if their questions on wonder are dismissed? What happens then? And what happens when their wonder is obscured by cell phones and the constant bombardment of data? When did you first perceive wonder? Can you even remember the time? And when you discovered it, was there anyone with whom you could share it? Perhaps when we're young, it's incredibly important to speak with someone about wonder, to have it acknowledged as something filled with awe and not simply a common, ordinary occurrence. If someone dismisses your glimpses of wonder, you might just think, it's not so special after all. Maybe it isn't as exciting and amazing as I thought it would be. Another word for wonder might be mystery. Some of us lived into mystery and wonder at an early age, while others of us have had our amazement squashed by people around us who think that amazement is just plain silly. What happens then? Do we put mystery and wonder on the back burner and instead live with the concrete, the provable, the practical? When our perceptions are minimized by others into mundane, ordinary reality, do we learn to negate wonder and mystery and instead cling to that which is definitive, that which has no ambiguity? And what happens with wonder in today's world? Do we even notice it? How many of us perceive an eyeful of wonder? Just the other day, I walked through my garden and noticed 2 monarch caterpillars on my milkweed plants. I was ecstatic. I planted milkweed 2 years ago and kept looking at it and looking at it and looking at it and finding nothing. But then this year, there were the caterpillars chomping on it, and they really do chomp. I've seen swallowtail caterpillars on my parsley plants, but never monarchs on my milkweed. Maybe I'm just one of those Looney Tune master gardeners who get giddy at the appearance of a monarch caterpillar, but I hope I'm not alone. Yet as I walk and drive through my neighborhood, I'm amazed at how few people simply walk and observe that which is around them. Most everyone seems to be talking on their cell phone or listening on earbuds. When we're permanently connected to sound and voice, does the possibility even exist for us to perceive wonder? How does one hear the earth proclaiming God's glory when cacophonous sounds blot out almost everything? And what happens when our religion reinforces the concrete, the definitive? I remember asking questions when I was a child. There were always answers. There was no hint of mystery or ambiguity. If the Bible said it, it was so. Yet in the church in which I was raised, only certain things in the Bible were shared. I don't recall hearing about God's Spirit, and I certainly never heard that it lived within me. And there was little, if any, mystery to God. God was a judge, an angry one at that. Everything was black and white, no ambiguity, no gray, no mystery. Interestingly, the most often used description for God in the Hebrew Scriptures is gracious and merciful, abounding in steadfast love and righteousness. That's the most often occurring description of God in the Scriptures, and yet I don't ever recall hearing it. My fervent wish would be that no one here in Colonial had a similar experience, but I have a feeling that probably isn't the case. To be perfectly honest, I'm still struggling with the concept of a loving God who not only speaks to me through the world, through creation, but whose Spirit lives within me, who wants to have a relationship with me. It's not that I don't believe it. I do, with all of my heart. But my mind is another animal altogether. It keeps playing those old tapes, the ones that tell me I'm not worthy of God's love or compassion, and that God would never speak to me. What I need to do on a continual basis is capture an eyeful of wonder that speaks to me of God's abiding presence, not just in my life, but in the life of every living creature, even those I'm not particularly fond of. For me, that means stepping back and looking in my garden whenever I can. In the springtime, I look at blank spaces that appear to have no sign of life. And then I remember that there's some bulb or perennial that with the warmth of spring will just spring from the ground in short order. How some plants die to nothing in the cool weather and then spring to life with the warmer air and sun in the spring amazes me. It's a resurrection event. But there's more than just flowers in my garden. There are a myriad of other life forms buzzing around, relying on my flowers to support their own lives and colonies. Flowers have an amazing symbiotic relationship with bees and butterflies and other creatures. Did God create this symbiotic relationship so that we could learn how important relationships are, how important mystery is? Considering such things, how can one not be amazed at God's creative presence in the world? I need to do my part to help God's creation along, but God can probably do without me. I just can't do without God. What I finally learned is that God doesn't want to exist without me or without you. Each of us matters to God, whether we know it or not. God is always seeking relationship with us, and I think God suffers when we turn away. Perhaps that's why God keeps continuing to create wonder and awe in the world, to capture our attention. And let's face it, in today's world, that's increasingly difficult to do. So many people and things want to interact with us, and it feeds our egos when they do. With all the attention-grabbing trivia that surrounds us in our everyday lives, how do we even find a moment to interact with God? Maybe that's why I like my garden. Gardening for me is similar to faith. Anyone who grows a garden knows that creating a garden is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. Faith is like that too. It's a process, not a one-time event that we grab hold of and figure that we've got God solved. God is never solved. God simply is the greatest mystery that we will ever encounter. It's not that God doesn't want to be known. It's just that God is so big that we can only capture glimpses of God's wonder. But glimpses can be enough. On occasion, someone asks me about evolution and creationism and even astrology. I guess there are things about which pastors are supposed to have inside information. I'm not sure we do, but it's always fascinating to voice an opinion. Science has proven that evolution is factual. So some people wonder what that does to the presence of God in creation, as though God is incapable of using evolution in the creative process. Why do humans tend to inhibit God? If we can't imagine it, does it mean that God can't do it? Well, I think that God is so amazing that instead of creating one type of tree or one flower or one animal in the evolutionary process, God wanted diversity. And so God created the wonderful multiplicity of nature that we have. God creates diversity so that it will capture our attention and make us sit up and take notice. As for astrological signs, it seems many people think that believing that they exist somehow refutes God. Why? Why do we try to hamper God's creativity? Wouldn't it be boring if we were all alike? If our innate natures were all the same? I think so, and I think God thought so too. I do like to imagine once in a while how God thinks, and I'm always amazed. Maybe God figured that the sun and the moon and the planets and their positions in the heavens could be used to affect human personalities. Do we think that's so beyond God's capabilities that we dismiss it? I think many people do. But doesn't that possibly negate the wonder of God? Maybe that's just one of the mysteries that God created to make us different. If the heavens are telling the glory of God, why can't they also be shaping our glory, the glory of each one of us? I believe that God sees each one of us as a glorious creature, capable of love and compassion and relationship. We are, after all, God's hands and feet and voice in the world. How we use our lives to tell of God's glory is up to us. And I believe God cheers us on not in words that we can hear, but in messages and mystery that require silence to be heard. I know I've heard those messages many times in my life, though I've often ignored them because they didn't mesh with what I wanted. Other times I was too busy or too preoccupied to hear them. But I know that they were there, and I would imagine that each one of you also knows that God speaks to you in many ways. Sometimes it's through other people, even other people that we don't particularly like. Sometimes it's even through a monarch caterpillar. We just need to be attuned. We need to use our radar to hear the voice of God when it speaks, even if we need to be silent to hear it. God's silent prodding abounds in life, and if we embrace it, we may well be set on a lifelong path of discovery, growth, and gratitude for the wonder of it all. Consider these words by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Never lose an opportunity of seeing anything that is beautiful, for beauty is God's handwriting, a wayside sacrament. Welcome it in every fair face, in every fair sky, in every fair flower, and thank God for it as a cup of blessing. Amen. And substance. And now as we leave this place, those of you who belong to Colonial know that we turn to the center aisles and we share our covenant with one another. And for those of you who may be new, you don't have to share our community or share our covenant. You can simply receive it as a blessing that we give to you. We covenant with God and with one another, and do bind ourselves in the presence of God to walk together in Christian love. We seek to worship God in spirit and in truth, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Oh. now as you leave this place, know that you are leaving it as the hands and feet and lips and face of God in the world. So be that, and let your light shine so that others may see it and glorify God. Amen.